Welcome. Thank you for joining us here this morning for Building an International Practice, Business Models and Compliance. I'm Ashley Murphy, and this is my co-founder and co-host today, Matt Gorin. We'll be speaking with you for the next hour or so on this topic. So let's get into it. A little bit about the GFP Institute, first of all. Who are we? What is it? Founded in 2020 to provide education, community tools and resources and ongoing research for fiduciary financial advisors and affiliated professionals worldwide who work with clients whose financial lives cross borders. So that's what the GFP Institute is about. We've had a lot of good press, including a blog post here with Nerd's Eye View late last year, also mentioned in Inside Information, Bob Veris's publication. And there'll be a lot more coming up. We've got a few more spots and slots in various publications coming up in the next couple of months. A little bit about my co-founder here, Matt Gorin. So Matt is a PhD out of UC Berkeley. He was an adjunct professor of cultural psychology at UC Berkeley, an adjunct professor in personal financial planning at University of Georgia for a couple of years. He's been an adjunct professor at the American College for Financial Services and is now an assistant professor there. And has been since 2019. Matt?
That's right. Thank you for that introduction. Ashley is our founder of the GFP Institute, a cross-border citizen for life, born a tri-citizen, born in the UK, raised in Australia to an American mom, also a career changer, but has spent a lot more time in financial advising, founder of Arete Wealth Strategist, and himself a part-time professor. That's how we met a few years ago when I learned about insurance from Ashley back in 2014, I think.
2014, that's right. Yeah.
Been a while. We've known each other for a while. He has been the host of FPA International Cross-Border Knowledge Circle and has since earned its graduate diploma in financial planning in Australia. And like I said, that adjunct professor. So two professors. That's who runs the GFP Institute here. We'll talk a lot about the teaching that we still do through our webinars and masterclass.
All right. Speaking of the webinar series, in case you missed it, we just 2 weeks ago, we did differences in working with international versus domestic clients with Marina Hernandez. That was a well-received session. If you did miss that, you can find that on our website or go to the GFP Institute YouTube channel and see that. Today's presentation is part of a 4-part series where we'll be building on the prior presentation to introduce progressively more advanced topics and introduce the readers here. Sorry, the listeners, the watchers, the audience here to these various topics pertinent to international and cross-border clients. All sessions are on at the same time just for consistency's sake. So we'll see you in another 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks following that. So today's presentation, Matt's going to do a brief review of webinar 1 and talk about the size of the addressable market, how many individuals might there be in the United States and overseas for whom these topics are relevant. I'm going to be going through business models and talking about how one could profitably serve these kinds of clients. Matt will be going through the compliance concerns. I'll be talking about my own growth experience in the last 2 3/4 years since really focusing exclusively on this niche, and a little bit about my business model to round out that previous topic there on business models. And Matt's going to go through and just briefly outline where you can find out more about the GFP Institute and about our masterclass. Okay. So with that, Matt.
Last time, Ash and Marina talked about the big differences between cross-border and domestic planning. And the cross-border clients generally have all the same concerns as domestic clients and additional concerns on top of that. And we spoke about the investment issues that they run into and whether there are certain essentially tax penalties for having investments that remain overseas. There's insurance concerns that they run into. There's estate planning considerations and even just legal considerations. Are you a resident of the US or some other country? Do you have the appropriate visa? And that sort of thing. All of these issues planners need to be mindful of when working with cross-border clients. Of course, none of those things are concerns for domestic only clients. A big motivation for why we founded the GFP Institute, because your typical CFP program doesn't talk about any of that stuff. The phases of the expat move was also addressed. We've got folks who are coming in, maybe they're temporary movers, they're just beginning to enter the US economic ecosystem. And those people have very different concerns from folks who've been around for a little bit longer or considering becoming permanent stayers in the United States, whether they are still making that decision of, do I stick around here for a little bit because of a career or a relationship? Do I go back home? And then we get into the folks who in many ways are just like our domestic clients, people who've rooted themselves in the US, they might have moved their assets overseas. So whether we're talking about the people who are transitioning, are trying to decide whether to stay or go back, or have decided the US is their permanent home, these are very different considerations. And depending on the type of clients you want to work with, very different concerns as you're working with them. Some of the major bear traps or pitfalls that we talk about, I mentioned those tax penalties associated with certain investments. We've also got an exit tax that you want to be mindful of. There are some permanent residents who think, hey, I'm not a US citizen, I can go back home. Well, if you've been around in the US long enough, you might have to pay a 40% exit tax on certain investments. For US expats living abroad, there are issues like you might not have your life insurance payout or your disability insurance payout. And of course, there's also issues around the US global tax net. Those US citizens abroad might not realize that the US IRS has very long fingers. And challenges working with expats. We're actually going to talk a bit about this today. Not only did we have issues, as we mentioned last time, with service providers, finding the right investment vehicles, making sure those tax issues are dealt with, but today we're going to touch on additional potential regulatory hurdles that you might face. Are you appropriately registered in the countries that you are working in? And if not, that can really be a bummer to mess that up for yourself.
You know, I meant to add also, we only made it about 2/3 the way through the content in the last presentation. There's a lot of very interesting material that we didn't get time to get to. So what we're planning on doing is adding another session that we can continue with probably in early August is our thinking there. So we're going to throw that on at the end. So I would have rather kept true to the name for today's session and focus on business models and compliance than have it be largely about a completely different topic altogether. So that was the decision we made with what we didn't get to in the last presentation. So.
All right, Ash mentioned that there's an addressable market that in my opinion, I think in Ash's opinion, these folks are often overlooked. Again, that typical focus on domestic planning clients ignores a lot of people living in the United States. There are more than 30 million people living in the US legally that were born overseas. Now, some of these people are US citizens, they're staying here permanently. Others are not planning on sticking around for a while. Again, there's all these different issues that they face. But think about this in the broader context of the US population. Census just came out, said there's 331 million Americans. Well, that's almost 10% of these people were born overseas. That is a giant potential market for our planners. There's also, taken the other way, about 8 million Americans living abroad all over the world. I don't know how many countries there are exactly, but 160 plus is where we are living. That's essentially everywhere. Those Americans are facing all sorts of issues that we cover in the masterclass. We'll touch on some of them today. And then we've got tens of millions of people who we wouldn't say are really living in the US, they're coming in and out. And this is a group of people who's cycling through pretty regularly. You know, think of how long visas last. Generally speaking, people are in and out in a relatively short period of time. That's not to say that their issues aren't important. They don't want to work with a financial planner. So we've got this group who maybe aren't going to be lifelong clients for 20, 30 years, but still might want planning. And the other issue that we want to keep in mind, while certain folks might think of immigrants, if you're watching the news, there's talk about refugees and all that. So the image of immigrants coming to mind for some people is lower income folks, people seeking asylum, and that's really not representative of people coming to the United States. The typical immigrant is actually an above average earner, has above average wealth. So think about those H-1B workers, those professionals. There's a lot of folks who want to come to the U.S. and invest in our real estate, spend a lot of their money. And just by the nature of how immigration often works, it's much easier to immigrate if you have an education, you have a high-paying job. Generally, that is who's coming over, and these people really do need financial advising services.
Absolutely. And just to speak to that a little bit, let's think about some common visa categories. So the L1, senior managers. So these are foreigners that are senior managers in global corporations that are moving in. O category visas, people of extraordinary talent. So they're coming in. By definition, well, they wouldn't qualify for their visa if they didn't have something special to offer. E3s, that's specific to Australia. You've got to be a worker in a company of some kind or another. So again, by definition, they're not even here without some income and without some financial resources. Business models. Let me pick up from here. So this is an interesting topic to all financial planners, and particularly partners and individual RIAs here. So really, as we know, this business, the wealth management business, is predicated on the assets under management model. Is it perfect? No. But it's kind of like Winston Churchill with his comment about democracy. It's the worst of all systems except for all the others, right? It's what seems to be the most prevalent and in use out there. So how do you actually work with these clients if you've got a whole bunch of people that want to get their money overseas, in the case of folks moving out of the US? What if they're moving into the US and they have the majority of their net worth overseas? A little bit of a problem for the AUM model. Or what if, even worse, if they have the majority of their net worth overseas in illiquid investments, namely foreign retirement funds, which cannot be cashed out bar for any number of events that you wouldn't want to have happen anyway, like terminal illness or bankruptcy or those kinds of things. So let's talk about that then. So your prospective client wants to get their money overseas in short order. They're moving, and they've said, I want to resolve what we talk about. We talk about this phenomenon called liability mismatch. They're now incurring expenses in a foreign currency. They want to have their investments in a foreign currency. Well, not so fast, or at least not all of it so fast. And we'll talk about some pros and cons to the US system and why they might be wise to keep some assets here. But in terms of business models that might work here, you could employ an advice fee plus an AUM period, an AUM fee, and have a minimum commitment period in order to make that viable for you. Because again, if they're looking to just up and move and they really want to do this as quick as possible, then the AUM model really makes sense for someone over time. But if it's a much shorter period, then it can be a little bit more challenging to profitability. This is the strongest one that I've seen, and that is the possibility of retaining some US-based AUM. So when you present some objective data, Morningstar produce every couple of years, they produce their Global Fund Investor Experience Study. It's a fantastic report, and it's something we spend a little bit of time on. It's a required reading for lesson 6. It goes through, and it's this huge study, and they look at, must be about 40 different countries, and they say, if you could invest anywhere in the world, where would you get the best overall treatment? And they break that treatment down by 4 criteria. They're looking at fees, they're looking at the distribution network applicable in that country, so the sales environment. They're looking at the regulatory environment, and they're looking at taxes as well. And so when you break them, those 40 different countries down, US comes out as number 1. Doesn't come out as number 1 in every criteria, but in terms of fees, it certainly does. In fact, it comes out by a significant margin. Turns out Australia is also gold ranked. Morningstar used their very typical medal ranking system here for this, and Australia also happens to be gold ranked. That is a country near and dear to me. I'm actually in Australia right now. I focus on working with Australians in America and Americans in Australia, and so when I can show them that there's about a 40 basis point difference for the average mutual fund between the two countries, that's pretty compelling. And of course, when you fill in some more color into that example and you say, oh, by the way, in the US, we don't really have platform fees. Sometimes yes-ish, but really no. And also transaction fees, well, that's also been a boon for clients ever since, was it November in 2019 when Schwab matched Robinhood with $0 trading on ETFs and stocks. So the US seems pretty compelling when you look at it, at least from a transaction point of view, and then also the stability of the US financial system still being the global reserve currency. So that's a pretty compelling argument that you can make is yes, if you're moving overseas, you would be well advised to take the majority of your assets, but do consider keeping some of your money here. Account establishment fees, that might be something I do have that written into my ADV. Haven't really used it that much, but it did come up with a client I just spoke with again yesterday. Why did it come up? Because it was an account opening from hell. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. It was the worst ever. Took us a year to open this account. And so given just, I'm not doing a very compelling job there on selling you on the viability of this business model, but that is something that you might consider doing. So that I had to do that given that we'd spent more than a dozen hours with this guy. He had an I-10 that had apparently elapsed, and we had to go through and get that reissued, and then getting things US notarized from a foreign country is no easy undertaking, especially when they live in rural Australia. Okay, account closure fee, that's another idea. I'm just throwing mud at the wall here, people. I'm not making specific recommendations for you. I think there's a lot of variety out there. You choose what works for you. This is another approach, the account closure fee. So you might say, if within, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, if you close the account, then there's going to be this account closure fee. Otherwise, we're fine with it. We'll just run with a traditional AUM model. So those are the outbound client models that you see here. Next, we could talk about the inbound models of two varieties. So you've got the inbound client who does have some liquid assets, but in my experience, clients rarely just up and move and say, right, that's it. My first order of business is I'm going to sell my house overseas. I'm going to liquidate all my investments and move as soon as possible. My financial life, move as soon as possible to the United States. Even though that might be a good idea, or it might have even been a better idea to have done that before obtaining US tax residency. Nevertheless, this is a common situation. So there's still a possibility for investment management with the appropriate custodian. Lot of headaches with that. That's something that we're working on. It's a long-term project there, but what I'm alluding to is if you do have a client who has significant assets held overseas, firstly, there are US custodians that would be happy to work with that client, even before their move, possibly with no US personhood, which is striking to some individuals to hear that there are custodians that would open an account even before that individual has any US identity or particular tie to the US. The other element is to do with the restrictions that come about by virtue of passive foreign investment corporation rules, which essentially means that it is unduly burdensome to own foreign ETFs or mutual funds if you are now a US tax resident. So we don't want to do that. Therefore, we would want to liquidate anyway. So what I'm getting at here is there a possibility that we could own a foreign denominated stock portfolio, otherwise known as an SMA? Could we own an SMA with a US custodian invested in foreign companies in a foreign currency? So we haven't yet converted, but still you're working with that client on a broader plan to re-domesticate those assets to the US. Okay, so as you heard me say a minute ago, there is that notion over time that the client will want to be moving their assets to the US for many of the aforementioned benefits that I mentioned there. investment restrictions with PFIC. So there's going to be some wind at the advisor's back for moving those assets into the US, courtesy of the benefits. So the carrots and the sticks that are present here in the US. AUM only, might that work? It could, pursuing that line of thinking I had a minute ago with finding the right custodian that would work with those foreign assets in that foreign currency, setting up an SMA possibly. An advice fee is probably going to be the answer in the shorter term. So what we do at my firm, and I'll be talking about this a little bit later, is we have a service package business model. So for the first quarter, typically we'd be billing that client directly. It includes an amount of AUM in there. So we're kind of, by virtue of how that fee is structured, we're creating an incentive for that client to move assets in, because then they're getting better value for money. That's part of that service package fee already includes a certain amount of AUM. So they would be well advised to begin moving assets there. So it's creating an incentive for that. But that's another possibility, is some kind of advice fee. I do work closely with some hourly advisors for referrals that aren't quite a fit for the business model that I have. And it's actually a beautiful fit for hourly advisors, given that these clients, as we're alluding to here, they may not have significant assets in the US as of yet. Well, what about if the prospective client has the majority of their net worth overseas in illiquid vehicles? That would be a real problem. So that is something I see all the time. Australian superannuation is just forget it. You just cannot get your money out before retirement. If for one of the provided reasons, and they're not pleasant, you wouldn't want to have it happen, certainly to you nor to your client. So those are things like terminal illness, long-term unemployment, bankruptcy, et cetera, et cetera. So what could you do here? Well, thinking creatively, it really puts us back in the advice fee space. If you're a fee-only advisor, if you're an insurance advisor, if you take commissions, there might be the possibility for some kind of commission there for a financial product that they would benefit from obtaining in the US. So that's what I have on business models. I'm going to hand it back to Matt to talk about regulations and licensing.
Yeah, and just a note on that idea of insurance commissions. Of course, that's not for everyone if you're fee only, but as we mentioned a couple weeks ago, a lot of times these insurance policies don't translate overseas. So this is a group of people who more likely than a domestic client would need a whole new suite of insurance products for them. So that's a more appealing business model than it might be for a brand new domestic client. And it's another thing to really keep in mind. Ashley was talking about that's not equivalent of a US person leaving. They might want to leave a lot of AUM here. For a foreign born or a person coming to the US, they might want to bring some AUM to the US. So there's this real different set of business models, whether people are serving people who are leaving or coming here. US AUM is often better. Other things that are going to come up is the regulations that you are facing. And this is going to seem like a lot of me punting the issue, because the short story here is there's 160 plus countries out there, and there's no universe where I can say here are the rules that apply across the board. There's some general trends that we're going to focus on, particularly for the US, but what you really need to do is make sure that you understand what regulations apply in the countries that you serve. And there's not a one size fits all there. You might be some of you might work with clients in one country and have one set of regulations that apply to you. Others might have an identical business model in a different country and a completely different set of regulations that apply to you. Big picture, these systems, the regulatory systems out there can be divided into a few different categories. One of those is a residency-based approach. So if you are working with clients who are residents of that country, you've got to register in that country. And I believe Australia is notable for this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
If it's any
Exactly.
client, I think in the case of Australia, in Canada and in Mexico, these are also countries that have something like a residency approach. If you're serving those clients, you've got to go register in those countries. Other countries have advisor-based approach. You have to register if you, the advisor, live in that country. And I would say, the U.S. is a bit of a hybrid, but the U.S. has more of that advisor-based approach. The SEC is going to want you to register if you would have to register with the SEC. And then we've got a product-based approach. And product, kind of loosely defined, I think we might say product/service, right? Where is the product being sold or the service being offered? So if you are providing that product or service in the borders of that country, you've got to register. If you're not providing the product or service inside those borders, you don't need to register. And to my knowledge, Sweden is one example of a country where if you're not providing investment services inside the Swedish borders, you can still work with Swedish citizens, can still work with Swedish residents, so long as that advice isn't happening while they are in Sweden. Sweden doesn't care. You can be registered wherever. So again, that's, what did I mention? 4 countries. So that's not the scope, right? That's not the entirety of regulations out there. So you absolutely need to understand that situation. And I believe, Ash, you've gone through the process of hiring a regulatory consultant to help you with that. And that's something that everybody may want to consider, right? This is worth your dollars potentially if you are servicing a lot of clients overseas and need to get that answered so you don't run into any legal trouble.
You make a really good point there, Matt. So in moving to Australia, I moved with my family here back in January of this year, and I planned that move for 6 months. And part of that planning was, of course, making sure that my regulatory obligations were in order. And so I actually engaged 2 different firms because I wanted there to be an agreement of the minds as to exactly what the regulatory situation was. And I got 2 different answers. So one firm got back to me and said, well, you can stay as a state registered advisor. I have less than 100 million in assets under management. So they said, that's fine. You can stay as a state registered advisor and we'll broker a conversation with your state regulatory agency. The other firm, and these are both lawyers, not compliance consultants. The other firm got back and they said, well, it's pretty clear to us that when you read the investment advisor guidelines that foreign-based advisors are to be regulated by the SEC. And I found that to be pretty compelling because when I took that advice and became SEC registered, there is in fact a box to be ticked. Like there's a specific category that says if you are foreign-based, then you're in the right place. And we welcome advisors to register here who are in that situation. So when someone such as myself gets 2 conflicting answers, it makes me worried for the broader community that how is anyone without spending thousands of dollars supposed to be able to get reliable answers to these kinds of questions? And that yet again, Matt, we'd be rich if we got $1 for every time we said that's why we founded the GFP Institute. But it's truthful. That's why is because it's just so hard to get some of these answers in the first place. Oh, and Matt had mentioned, and I'll hand it right back to you in just a sec, Matt, that the U.S. is a hybrid system. So,
right, I think in the next slide here, right. So the U.S. environment, of course, is a little bit different. Ash mentioned the Morningstar report that the U.S. is pretty good on a lot of things. One of the things it's not so good with is the complexity of our regulations. Ash just mentioned, right? Sometimes federal with the SEC, sometimes state, depending on your AUM. That particular model we don't find often around the world. So if you are a US-based advisor, you live in the US, you are a US citizen or a permanent resident, you're serving non-US based clients, people born overseas or residents overseas, then just register with the SEC or with your state, again, depending on your AUM, just as he was saying. Now, if you are someone who's not based in the US, you are a foreign resident who is serving US-based clients, now we get into the complexity. And again, this is going the opposite way that Ash was talking about of him moving to Australia. Here we got someone moving to the US or at least serving US clients. You're going to probably want to hire a consultant and see what those rules are. Who has to register with the SEC? Pretty vague language around this. The quote here is anyone who serves or, quote, holds out to US persons. Who is a US person? Any individual or organization. So you work with businesses, those are also considered US persons. And then hold out. What do we mean by that? Do you market to or regularly communicate with any of those US persons? And there have been, I don't know, court cases necessarily, but some regulators have gotten involved in like exactly what is holdout. And Ash, I believe you know the details of this more, but there was some issue relatively recently where a website, which anybody could access anywhere in the world, was accessible to US residents, right? There wasn't some kind of firewall or something. And I believe it was the SEC said, hey, because this is a website that someone from the US could conceivably stumble upon, you need to register with the SEC. And I don't know how many, Australian-based or Swedish-based or Sweden-based advisors or whatever are going to think to themselves, oh yeah, of course I'm marketing to the US because I put up a Wix website or something like that. So again, be very careful, hire those consultants, get advice on that. Now, other people are going to be exempt from registering the SEC, and you really need all of the above. This is not or, this is and. No place of business in the US, that should be pretty clear. Is there an office or not? Do you have fewer than 15 clients? SEC says that's de minimis, we don't even bother with you. Do you have less than 25 million US-based AUM among those less than 15? Again, you're kind of too small to be bothered with. And another one that's really going to come up a lot, and this is what Ash was just talking about in the Australian case, do we have a regulatory body that you're registered with overseas, wherever you are, that is, the quote, substantially comparable to the SEC? So it's the ASIC, I think, is the Australian.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? That's considered substantially comparable to the SEC. So the SEC says, you're registered with ASIC. All right, that sounds good. And again, we happen to know about that in the Australian case. I can't speak to the other 160 countries out there. The SEC does publish this list of mutual recognition agreements. You can Google that, SEC Mutual Recognition Agreement. I think in our notes section somehow, if that's possible, there's a link that you can follow and see the list of those countries. It's not all of them. It's not even close to all of them. I think it's about 30. So if you're one of those 30, maybe you don't have to register SEC. If you're not on that list, it's going to be a bit of a headache to be blunt. All right. Some of the other issues you're going to need to keep in mind, as we mentioned, AUM is a big part of this. What is your AUM? Whether you are based abroad or you're based in the US. So again, do you have to register at SEC or not? So you want to be continuing to update your ADV as necessary and pulling out what percentage of your AUM is serving those, or rather is from those non-US persons. You really need to separate that off and be clear on that. And then another thing to keep in mind, we've been talking about who the advisor needs to register with. Another thing to consider is whether you're working with people from abroad who you are not legally allowed to work with because they're part of some sanction list. So do yourself a favor, follow that link, the sanctions list search, plug in their name and see if some government agency has said it's a big no-no to do business with them.
All right. So now I'm going to briefly run you through my growth story since launching as an RIA. August 6, 2013 is a day etched in my memory. That was when my California state registration came back. And really, at that time, I was a generalist. If you could fog a mirror, if you had 2 legs, some clients had 4, just kidding, then you were a good fit for my firm at that point in time. Not proud of that, but that's just the case as it is for many advisors getting started. And it wasn't until, let me see, it was the beginning of 2018, I had been approached by a local university. They said, we'd like to do a marketing report for you. And I said, well, I've got 2 brands. I've kind of dabbled in this cross-border area. And I also work with domestic clients. And they said, well, that's fine, but we're only doing 1 study, so pick which brand it's going to be. And so from there, I chose, well, let's go with this cross-border one. I was just finishing up my studies I was getting a graduate diploma in financial planning here in Australia. And I thought, well, let's just go all in. And that's what I did. So let's, for the sake of the measurement that we're using here, let's give a 6-month delay before looking at some of these numbers. So we'll get to that on the next slide. So business model, what business model do we employ to profitably work with these clients? On the whole, I'm looking for longer term client engagement. So really not looking for short-term transactional sort of engagements. I would say the average tenure is reduced because of that tendency for folks to want to move assets overseas during COVID. So for the past year and probably for the next year or so, I'm expecting more outbound than inbound into the US. And as a result, there is a little bit of a flow overseas, but it's not nearly as fast as you might think. There's also a lot of prospects, an absolute ton of prospects, and so it's a matter, you know, as they say, the riches are in the niches. Choosing the right niche, identifying yourself as a subject matter expert in that particular area, and then clients will find you. So we don't do hourly, we don't do project-based, it's really service package based. So what's that mean? It's essentially a fixed fee that includes a certain amount of AUM. I have that up on my website so that folks can easily go there, and it reduces essentially the sales cycle. So I can say, well, it's up here, you can have a look. We describe in detail exactly what we do depending on what service level. So investment management here, this is interesting. Some folks might wonder, well, gosh, if you're a full service wealth management firm, then why do you have this investment management option? And that's because of the re-domiciled clients. So the folks that have moved back to Australia, as Matt alluded to a minute ago, given the regulatory environment in Australia, I can't, unless this wholesale client exemption applies, and that's for clients with more than $500,000 of Australian assets, investable assets. Unless the exemption applies, I cannot give advice on the Australian side. And so I refer out to a number of partner firms who in turn refer back to me. So there's a nice system of other cross-border advisors that I'm able to pass clients on to get local advice where they are in fact registered here. So a client may start in one of these higher service packages, they wrap up their loose ends in the US, move back to Australia, and then there's some portion of assets that they retain on the investment management side. So, so that's why I have that investment management option. And then, as you would expect, as we move from base camp, Ascent Summit, we're climbing up the mountain here before we attain nirvana with arete. That's from the Aristotle is where the word arete comes from. So it's about excellence of behavior and attributes of excellence in a whole manner of personal ways. So as we move up there, you see the price increases, AUM included increases, and the number of different services we're providing increases. No surprise there. Okay, so what has that meant in terms of revenue growth? So starting from July 1st of 2018, so 2 3/4 years, that's a 171.5% increase in that period of time to end of March, so the most recent quarter. And in terms of AUM growth, what has that meant? That has meant 313%, given this change in business model, give us this focus on this niche, really significant growth that we're seeing right there. So that's just my story in focusing on this niche. Matt, can I hand it back to you to talk about the GFP Institute?
Right on. And thank you, Andrew, for posting that link to the list of countries where we have that SEC mutual recognition agreements. That's what's going on in the chat over there. Just like with Arete, he's got those different membership levels for clients. We also have different membership levels for the GFP Institute. Open membership is hang out with us in our forum, see introductory presentations like the one that we are in now. Happy to have you around, happy to spread the word about that. There's some other more intensive membership offerings that we have. Associate membership not only gets access to those community forums, but also some more in-depth advanced presentations, a little bit more detailed information, a little bit more actionable information. So think more like a CE detailed sorts of things. We've also got discounts to our future conferences and events and access to our professional services networks. We are building right now a network of international CPAs, I think in particular CPAs, that's kind of where we're focusing is on the accountant side. Taxes are a big part of the cross-border experience, and then also many lawyers. Of course, that's also a major part of this. So we are, many of the folks in this room, I imagine, are bringing the financial planning angle. We're building this network of these tax and legal experts. The full membership is for folks who've gone through our masterclass, something we highly encourage everybody to do. And that also then opens up these additional practice tools. I think we'll have a little bit more detail on some of those on a future slide, but it's we've been able to negotiate a lower foreign exchange rate, basically the institutional exchange rate, something far lower than what you could go out and get on your own. We've got a tax calculator for those people who are exiting. I mentioned before that 40% exit tax. We've got a calculator that is very helpful there. And then a client investment plan that considers the different currencies their assets might be in, and does it make sense to when should you sell and buy given the different exchange rates and their fluctuations. Another thing that we are recently adding here is we're going to pull you in for certain media inquiries. Ash mentioned that we've been in the Nerd's Eye View with Michael Kitces, Bob Barris's articles. I'm also a columnist for Kiplinger. We've got articles coming out in that, every single month. I've got a column coming out, and I'm happy to pull folks in and any other related opportunities. Here these are again. Maybe Ash, is there anything you want to call more attention to? Oh, the advisor search tool. I think that's one. So it is. We're building this tool now, or I think we just release it, Ash? Do you know a timeline on when that?
Yeah, that's actually coming up May 5th. We've got a webinar for full members. There's currently 30 full members within the GFP community. And so actually that email is going out today about a webinar next week where we're going to go through all of this in detail.
There you go. So if you're interested in full member benefits, maybe punt that to that May 5th webinar. The short story on that advisor search tool is that clients who are interested in hiring a financial advisor can find a full member, one of our full members, who is really well suited to their particular situation. We've called attention a few times to all the different kinds of clients we have. You want to find that those clients want to find someone who's a good fit for their personal experience. Okay, what are some benefits of joining the GFP Institute? I would say that first one is, in my opinion, I think the single most important one. We've got a network of people who are interested in these issues, who are experiencing these issues, and who have a real diversity of skill set. Of course, a lot of us are financial planners, like Ash and I are both CFPs. We've got those accountants, we've got those lawyers, we have other people who are well versed in these, in some cases, extremely complex, extremely niche issues that our clients are facing. To our knowledge, at least, there's no better place than the GFP Institute to meet these folks, to become partners, essentially, for those ongoing complicated issues that our clients face. Really easy to meet folks who are passionate about this and who are making this their life's work. Another thing that we are hoping to provide all of our members for years to come is reducing their workloads. You have to keep abreast of these issues on your own and subscribe to all these different journals and have all these Google subscriptions for the articles that come to you. That can be very time consuming. By providing a distilled, simplified version of these big rule changes to alert you to when they are happening, it can save you a really big amount of time. And then I mentioned those one example of an institutional level discount that we're providing. There's more to come. We are a group. We're not just one person reaching out to these entities on our own, right? There's a big group of people, strength in numbers. We're able to negotiate rates and deals that you simply couldn't get on your own. And the more of us there are, the longer that this goes on, the more clout we'll have, and the better and better those deals will become. You want to learn more, check out that website, gfp.institute/ membership. One of the biggest things that we do right now, and a big focus of our attention, is this master class on U.S. inbound and outbound international financial planning. It is, as the title suggests, really focused on the U.S. in and outbound experience. So what we are focusing, a little more detail on this, we're talking about how to avoid these major pitfalls and obstacles facing expat clients, both going out, so U.S. folks going out, and foreign-born folks coming in. What are the appropriate investment banking and real estate options for those people? How do we manage their different risks? We're going to talk about the different insurance solutions available, and then we spend a bit of time on foreign exchange. Of course, if you're going basically anywhere outside of the US, you're going to be dealing with a different currency, and that can introduce a lot of issues. As I mentioned, tax planning is a major part of what we do, not only on their income, but also on their assets. And then even more specifically on those assets, the income produced from those assets and the sale of those assets, any income we get from the sale. Each of those things, our income, our assets income, and the sale of assets, each of those has some potentially major pitfalls, and we spend a great deal of time on that. And then how to get help from a lot of these folks. Kind of the guiding principle of this masterclass is we want you to be aware of all of the big issues, all of the potential catastrophes. At the end of this masterclass, you're not going to be able to go out and be the expert and know every single thing that there is to know, because you'll never know everything there is to know. It's not possible, particularly when we think about all the different possible countries. Each one of those interacts with the US a little bit differently. So a major part of what we do is alert you to what issues should you be asking about, what big picture things should you be concerned about, and then how do you hook up with these different estate planners, accountants, and other specialists that can really get into the weeds and do that work for you. If you think of a financial planner as being the quarterback of a client's financial team, you need to know what all of your options are. You need to know, to belabor the analogy, where the blitz is coming from and what kind of defense they're running. You need to know all those different things going in. Do you need to block yourself? No, of course not. We have people you can work with to do that work for you and for the client. After you are done with the master class, that's not only a series of individual webinars, it's also an exam that then allows us to say you qualify for this GFP designation. So we're putting that out there into the world. Add that onto the back of your title. Join all the other alphabet soup that you have behind your name that everyone in financial services has, and continue to use those marks. A great way to speak to clients and say, look, I have spent the time and investment on these issues. Here's a little bit more detail on those different lessons that we cover. You can see all those different issues that I mentioned. We spent a lot of time on this. We brought in a lot of different experts to help build these things out. And each of these lessons is curated, hosted by some of these experts, either who helped us build the slides or that we went out and found. So when you attend these lectures or watch the recordings, you're also getting direct access to their mind and their experience, and ask them questions. They're really excited to meet with people who are passionate about this work. Here are some of those folks: Andrew Fisher and Marina Hernandez, both tax experts across borders. Alan Koski is an expert in the global insurance situation, particularly when it comes to healthcare. Jonathan Mintz is an estate planning expert. Katrina Haynes, another CPA working with tax issues across borders, and Melvin Warshaw, JD, dealing with the international tax laws. So some really very high quality folks and very experienced folks, dozens and dozens of years of experience collectively. As I mentioned, we got the 10 lessons plus the final exam. The next class is coming up on June 3rd. It runs every week. I think we're skipping one, but about every week, June 3rd to August 13th. It's going to be 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can adjust your time zones as you need to. I believe for Ash, that's 7 in the morning for you. Something.
6 till 8.
Cool. Not the best time for for poor Ashley. The class format is those live Zoom webinars. And then, as I mentioned, we've got time for Q&A. You can watch those recordings if for whatever reason those times don't work for you, and reach out to us on our portal. You can speak to us. You can ask questions of the host. And again, as I said, my number one reason why the GFP Institute exists is to network, is to meet with us and meet with these other folks. So by all means, avail yourself of that. Course fee, we're asking for $29.95 early bird pricing. We're going to offer that for 3 more days, and then we tag on a little bit extra onto that cost. Included in that fee is the first year of full membership in the GFP Institute. After that, $445 a year. And if you help us grow the GFP Institute by recommending other people take the masterclass, we'll take $500 off that price. Offer that to enough folks, and it is free. You want to register for the GFP Masterclass? I hope you do. Go to gfp.institute/GFP program and learn more, get all those details in writing.
All right. And that's a wrap, folks. So we want to invite some questions here. And now that I've minimized my screen, I can see a question that's been lingering there for a little bit. Andrew Lehman asks, Ashley, for financial planning, what software do you use? I believe this is about to be discussed by Marina before we ended last session, so happy to wait for the added session in August if you prefer. Well, I am happy to answer that, Andrew, and the answer there is I use eMoney Advisor, but we have practices and protocols of how we use eMoney in order to make it a little bit more accessible internationally. The state of the software market, the financial planning software market, is abysmal at the best of times, and it's especially poor when it comes to international. There was a case, Plan Plus Global, Sean Brayman's company, did offer an international program, but that was sold to Morningstar. I guess that was about 18 months ago that deal was consummated. So they're off the market. There's another company called Voyant, which no one has ever heard of in the US, but is actually the market leader everywhere outside of the US. They're based in Austin, strangely enough, and yet have very little presence in the US. But they are working on a version for an international program. So that's the answer there, Andrew. We will cover that in that future lesson, a little bit more details to how I kind of jerry-rig eMoney to work for international clients. Cara is the presentation today offering CPE. Matt, that might be more in your domain answering that one.
Yeah, I want to say no, but that's something that we could register with the CFP to offer. CFP CE. That, by the way, that master class does offer CE. We have that approved to the CFP board already. It's 28 hours.
Yep, it's the whole thing except for ethics. Yeah, so
every time your CFP CE comes due, they require a separate ethics course. So there's really nothing we can do about that. But otherwise, taking the master class is, the entirety of the CE you need. And Kara's asking, but not for CPAs, correct? So, right, we have not yet gone through the CPA CE requirement. That is on our infinite to-do list. But yes, that is the plan. That's the goal. So the next step, right? So we got CFPs. That was our number one priority for CE. CPAs is next. What a small world that would be if someone could tell me how long of a timeline that is to get CE approval. It took us about 2 months for the CFP. So given that that's next upon our agenda, I'm hopeful that there's enough time to get the June class offered for CPA CE, and that we have a handful, about 10% or so of our folks are CPAs. So absolutely, we want to get that approved. I can't promise that next June class will be ready for CE, but at some point down the line, absolutely, that is the goal. You're very welcome.
Any other questions, concerns, comments, feedback?
Andrew's asking here, what is the path for brand new advisors to work with international cross-border clients when you're still building a practice and reoccurring revenue with domestic clients? Recommendations. Well, I mean, Ash, that's pretty much your that's your path. I mean, that's your life.
All right. Yeah, I didn't see that there. It appeared at the bottom there. Hey, Ed. Hey, good to see you here. Thanks so much. Andrew, so what is the path to work with international when we're still building a practice and recurring revenue with domestic clients? Yeah, I often think about that. I think to myself, if you've ever seen that movie Castaway, if my plane went down, landed on a desert island, and my practice crashed and died, what would it look like if I had to rebuild it from scratch? And I think I could do it in half the time. That would be my feeling. And a lot of that comes from just how long it took me to develop a lot of the material that we're offering here in the masterclass. So how would you do it? I think I can only recommend the way that I've done it. It's not said it's the only way. In fact, I'm certain it's not the only way, given other major acquisitions we saw in 2020 with, what was it, Creative Planning bought Toon Financial in Madison, a couple $100 million RAA focused on inbound, outbound US clients. And also Worldview Wealth purchased by Cerity Partners, there's Andrew Fisher's firm. So there is some interest and activity just at the inbound, outbound level. I'm more of that solo RAA kind of guy, so just choosing that Australia-US niche serves me. And also from a lifestyle perspective, it's great to come here and visit the people that I love, and another country that I love, and be able to do it all as part of my business. So that's worked incredibly well. We are planning a future session. It would be a member-only session, Andrew, but really doing a deep dive on that. XY Planning Network approached me about that, and I thought that's a really good idea, like how to choose a niche within international and cross-border. So we're going to do a more involved session on how you would choose that particular country. I'm going to reread this again just to see if there's anything else that comes to mind. Well, so firstly, getting credentialed, knowing what you're doing, I think is the key thing, and then having special tools and templates to help you do that, because those tools and templates don't exist elsewhere. And we're still building them out as well. One that my paraplanner and I worked on just yesterday was coming up with a version 3.0 for our foreign exchange dashboard. So when we're helping clients convert large sums of money from one country to the other, we typically recommend that they convert that money over a period of time using limit orders. So we would say on a quarterly basis for the next 2 years, we'll convert, in approximately equal tranches, your retirement funds back to your home country. Well, how do you set those limit orders? And the way that where we're at currently is we're looking at using the standard deviation for the prior quarter, and then some number of standard deviations away from the current market price, setting a limit on the top end and then a limit on the bottom end. And it turns out there's a new kind of order that no one ever heard about, right? And there's Series 7 or 65. There's an order type called one cancels the other. And so we set up a one cancels the other order at the beginning of the quarter with a yet to be determined number of standard deviations away from the current price, and run it like that. And that's the kind of tool where it's really complicated to explain to someone, but when you can show them that, when you can show clients that that there's real value, significant value added when you can get a cent or two better than the average rate over that period of time. If there are particularly large amounts of money, then you can well and truly justify your fee just from improving the foreign exchange experience.
Yeah, so as actually demonstrating the level of complexity. It's incredibly complex to build one tool for one purpose. It's really incredible. So get the other advice I would say for Andrew and anybody else who's going at this alone is find that network, partner with these people who are exploring these issues. And actually kind of hinted at this idea of find your niche. What we've noticed a lot of relatively new advisors who are interested in this space, what we see them do is market themselves as cross-border advisors. I work with anybody, and that is not the way to go. As he suggested, pick that country and pick a niche even within that country and really tailor your services. Find those people who you can really hone in on. Don't be a generalist. That does not work well, and it's not good for your clients. Marty is asking here about Voyant. Ash, if you could post a link to Voyant in the chat, if you.
Yeah, I mean, Google search VO. I answered Marty actually in the chat panel. It's Voyant, and then just do Voyant financial planning. They've got an alpha version that they would be happy to set you up with that. I haven't used it myself because they told me it's an alpha version. If it was a beta version, it was about to go live, then that would be a different story. But they were very clear in saying it's not really ready for prime time as of yet. So that's all the time that we have for today's presentation. Thank you so much for your attendance here, and we'll look forward to seeing you in another couple of weeks. And thank you, Matt. Good to see you as always on the presentation, and everyone have a wonderful evening.